Marhaba and hello everyone, and welcome to the first of One Young World sessions hosted as part of the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Festival. My name is Rumaitha Al-Busaidi and I am a marine scientist, an environment and women's empowerment advocate, and also a lucky One Young World Peace Ambassador from Oman. This is where I'm speaking to you right now in my room in Muscat, and I had the privilege of attending the 2017 summit in Bogota, which was a phenomenal experience for me. One that I cherish very dearly. It has allowed me to engage with diverse perspectives, enhance my intellectual curiosity, and at a time that I needed it most, it motivated me to grow as a person. And for that, I am eternally grateful to the community. I'm so thrilled to be here with One Young World's co-founders, Kate Robertson and David Jones, who just over 10 years ago brought the organization to life. They have both had exceptional careers in the world of advertising and beyond, and they have been globally celebrated for their efforts to push for action and social change. Now, Kate currently leads One Young World as its CEO, and David is the founder of You and Mr. Jones, the world's first brand tech group. In the interest of time, I won't read through their extensive biographies, which I'm sure you are eager to know more of, especially their endless achievements and their recognitions, but you can find that all on the festival's website. So welcome to both of you, Kate and David. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Rumaitha. So good to be here.
So we'll be jumping right in with the first question. We'll be starting off with you, David. You co-founded One Young World when you were at the helm at Havas, one of the world's largest publicly listed communication groups. What inspired the both of you to shift gears and start the organization?
Great. So I'll answer, and obviously Kate, I'm sure, will jump in. But I think, Kate and I believe very early on that business should be a force for good in the world. And we're obviously in the corporate world. And I think we were very much of the view that we should be helping some of the world's biggest brands and businesses, have a purpose beyond profit. Now, this is very fashionable now, but, sort of 10, 15 years ago, it was a long way from being fashionable. And I think we believe passionately that if we were going to be advising other people about their purpose beyond profit, the first thing they would say is, well, what's yours? And we go, no, you just listen to us. We don't have to have one. And so, I kind of issued a challenge of what should our purpose be? And Kate came back with the idea of One Young World. And the rest, as they say, is history. But I think it was driven from a belief that, we should, whether you want to say take our own medicine or practice what we preach, that if we were going to tell the world that purpose is important, we should demonstrate that.
And the inspiration for it was David himself, because I know through many years in business that all change is entirely dependent on the character of the leader. And David at the time was our CEO at Havas, and there was change coming into the organization. But it's led by someone. It's not managed and it's not automatic. And David was a young, visionary, forward-looking leader. And if you can see that, if you can see that in just your business context, you can see it in the wider world. Everything ultimately depends on the quality of the leadership.
Exactly, and I totally agree with that. And I think to summarize it, you clearly spotted a gap in the sector and just kind of pounced on it to kind of get more young people into decision-making tables and into the platform in different ways. So my question is, and over to you, Kate, what distinguishes One Young World from other platforms focused on young people? What makes it unique?
David and I, both having marketing backgrounds, very, very conscious in creating something that it had to be distinct and different. And we weren't certain as we started that this focus on young leaders rather than youth in general would distinguish it, because for all we knew, there were other organizations. There weren't. There are a couple more today. But that instantly, to your point, Rumaitha, pointed up a gap and made us go, there's something else here. I think that, the branding, One Young World itself was a working title. The first iteration of the logo was just an iteration of something, and it improved later on when Biz Stone from Twitter got involved and helped us improve it a little bit. But the things that have made it unique are these. the level of the counselors that we've brought, and you've been there and you've seen it from in the early days, Desmond Tutu and Kofi Annan, Bob Geldof is still there, through all of the years, everybody that you can think of who's been on that stage, Mary Robertson, Gro Harlem Brundtland, all the young ones. We knew that there's a particular magic in being able to attend an event/conference where the best in the world at what they do are available to you. And then this thing that it is the only gathering in the world other than the Summer Olympics, where every single country in the world is present. These things are magical things, and they are not replicated elsewhere, but you've seen it yourself. In those things alone is a special thing, and I think it's unique. Yes.
And I think it's Kate made the point, it's about young leaders, not young people. And I think that's a critical difference. And I think, as you know, like this is the first generation of young adults that actually, have a better understanding of the biggest changes in the world than, senior adults or older adults. Through and because of technology, and they're creating all the companies that are the biggest and most powerful companies in the world today.
Totally agree with that. And you mentioned me being there and mentioned Bob Geldof. I still have goosebumps to this day on the whole memory of me being on stage with Bob Geldof and him doing the introduction for me before I actually took on stage and spoke about my idea and what I wanted to improve the state of the world. And that has been such a cherished memory for me that I think I will take to my grave. Now, in your years of bringing together young people from over 190 countries, and it's so unique in that sense that you actually get to meet people from countries that you've never been, and then you make plans to go and visit them and so on. And your ideas kind of flourish into something that was just restricted into one border to the world. What do you think differentiates good from great leaders? You were talking about young leaders. So what differentiates someone good from someone great?
Davey?
Look, I think probably the thing about leadership in any discipline is just resilience, because I think every single leader will have lots of people who disagree with them, who think their idea is bad, who don't think that will work. And I think the one thing that you see amongst, because you ask good to great, not the difference between people and leaders, but the good to great is just that unbelievable drive to, not let anything get in the way of achieving your objective. And they do it not alone, they do it by bringing people together. And I think, Kofi Annan, who was our founding counselor's one of his favorite quotes was, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But I think it's just that, resilience to run into obstacles and work out, how to get around them and just never let up.
I mean, for me, I think courage and persistence. It's that David's last point, never let up. But I think the courage to see an end goal or objective that someone else, other people don't see. David, it's like you when you were jumping the barrier to start Grand Tech. When you're seeing something that not necessarily the people that you need on side are actually seeing, but you see it. And then you have the courage to run at a thing that is not proven for you. No one's proved it for you. You carry in yourself the courage to go with that thing. That's the distinguishing, to me, that's the distinguishing. And then this persistence to just keep going. I mean, a leader today, and this would be controversial in any sense, but a youngster today, someone we spoke to last year, Joshua Wong in Hong Kong, who's just had a sentence of 13 months handed down. When I said to him, you're very young, and if you're going to go to prison for a long time, is that a good use of your youth? And he just said, I believe in democracy for the people of Hong Kong. And whatever I have to do, however long I'm in prison, that's what I believe in. And when you think about I'm not saying he's right or he's wrong. I don't wish to comment on that. But when you think of the courage and the persistence that lies in that, these things about leaders take your breath away. It's so special.
Truly is. So to summarize, courage, drive, persistence, and resilience.
Yeah, and I just add trust your judgment. I mean, listen to everyone, but trust your judgment, because I think the one thing everybody who has started an organization, started a company, you meet loads and loads of people who will explain to you why it's not going to work and what's wrong about it. And often, as Kate says, if you see things early, when you talk about them, people think you're a bit of an idiot. So trust your judgment and, go for it.
And that's a brilliant segue to the question that I actually have. Now, both of you were very experienced business leaders when you founded One Young World, but every new organization has its unique challenges. What obstacles did you not see coming in its early days?
Kate, do you want to start?
I think for me personally, some of the obstacles lay in ignorance. I didn't know how to do what I needed to do. So in my head, because I was a marketing person, I was just going to have this conference for young leaders and it would be grand. And David thought it was a good idea. And I'll just get some sponsors and it'll just be like that. Well, it's just not like that. But I think everybody with new things, I always say the learning wasn't a curve. It was straight up a ladder on a vertical wall. But anything you're doing that's new, I mean, as old as I was, and God knows I was old, I didn't have the experience at the new thing. So I think if I'd been 30 years younger, the learning would have had to be the same. So I don't know, that was, experience does matter. Yes, it does count. It does count. But you never have the quantum of hope that you'll have when you're young. You never have that much hope again.
No, but we were young, Kate. But no, I think
you were young.
I think the biggest obstacle we probably faced was when we were trying to get it off the ground. It was back in 2008, and the world's economy had just fallen off a cliff. And so when we were talking to people, we typically had one of two responses. It was either, this is a great idea, can you show us what it looks like? And we're like, well, no, because we've never done it before. Or this is a great idea, but have you seen the world's economy? We don't have any money. And literally in the first sort of year, or the first year we got it off the ground, like every month, I think Kate and I were like, no, we're really going to have to say we're not doing this now. And obviously in the end, as Kate said, we're suddenly going up on stage, and like the whole focus had so much been on, can we possibly get an event put on? We spent way less time on, well, if we can, what's the event? So there are a number of learnings there, but it goes back to the persistence point. If you want to do something, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
Now, if we kind of go back to when you just started, what were the two things that no one told you about when it comes to starting a nonprofit? What is something, like, I understand now that you didn't have the experience and people said no, and I think that's a universal thing. People say no to you when it's something unconventional and new, which is always entrepreneurial anyway. So what were the two things that you think no one told you about that you wish someone told you when you were starting?
I have one. I don't know if you have one, Kate. We can do one each.
Go for it.
I think, when you come from the world of business, the whole thing is about, is about generating profit and making money. And so, you can decide how you deploy that capital, but you sort of, you have money. And when you're a charity, you don't have money. And it may sound unbelievably obvious and basic, but you literally, the survival and continuation of your organization is 100%, because you're not selling anything, you don't have revenue in the typical sense, is 100% dependent upon people saying, yeah, no, I think that's a great idea and I'll fund you. I'll pay for some brilliant young leaders to have scholarships. And I think we probably, or certainly from my perspective, I probably didn't fully understand that, because when you've been in the business world, your business only exists because it's got revenue coming in.
I think, and aligned with that, I think the shock when you go from a business sector and for-profit, when you go to non-profit, is you don't have any controls. So if you're in business, you, to a degree, lead and influence and control the people who work for you, the people who work around you, and your customers, your suppliers, whatever. It's transactional. It's not like that in the not-for-profit world. It just isn't. So you're relying on the idea, as David said, an awful lot more, because people have got to follow along with the idea, because there's no cash profit. You can't prove that stuff. I think it's a hard one to get your head around if you haven't seen it. I think the other things that are a shock in the not-for-profit world are inefficiency, which we have not suffered from, but there's a lot of inefficiency in not-for-profit. A lot. A lot of people overlapping with each other. And if you come from the business world, you're just not in for that, because you haven't dealt with those things before. And you have to learn to deal with them and be nice. And it's hard.
I used to simplistically say that last century, charities had great intentions and poor execution, and business had great execution and poor intentions. And what we obviously need is great intentions and great execution.
I don't think it was simplistic. I think it was correct.
Great. And I think with all those challenges and all the learnings that you've learned, what came about is a product, which is One Young World, that has a culture that is so unique. You just mentioned how you never suffered inefficiencies, how you took all those learnings that you actually had from the private sector and so on, and kind of put it into this baby of yours. The organization is known to be agile, responsive, and it constantly, at least for me and what I see, it constantly brings new ideas to life. Was this always intentional? Like you wanted to kind of set yourself apart from everyone else? Or was it just basically a byproduct that came naturally as a result of how you basically lead? Your leadership styles brought you to this point.
I think, Dave, if I go first here, I think one of the things that has been important is going back to David, what David was saying initially, which was that we couldn't be advising clients on purpose when we didn't have anything to offer ourselves. And then after about 3 years of One Young World, one of our young leaders said to us, well, you've got to employ young people at One Young World, and this is going to have to be different. So I just took in my mind, I took my model of David, how David had been when I first knew him when he was early 20s. And what I saw with him then is he could follow anything you were telling him. And if you just set him free to execute it, he executed perfectly. And I've always held that and said to myself, fine, at HQ, we will have young leaders working for us and they will be allowed to lead. So your point, Rumetha, is, oh, it makes me so happy that you said that. Constantly, whenever they come up with a new idea, you think it's a new idea, it's not going to break the bank because that doesn't work for us, but you think it's a good idea, make it work. Yeah, the organization lines up behind you, get out there, make it work. And if you look at this, just this year on One Young World, all the stuff that the team have done themselves, like the Academy, like COVID Young Leaders Fund, like the table talks, extraordinary. But I do think you're all like that.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to practicing what we preach, is you can't say, we're all about young leaders leading. And by the way, Kate and I are going to decide what One Young World should think and do and say. And, often people misunderstand from the outside and think, oh, if we phone Kate and David, they'll say that
they'll fix it.
No, we won't. And I think it's really important, and that, and probably it applies to us now because we can debate how young we were back then. But another of Kofi's favorite sayings was, you're never too young to lead and you're never too old to learn. And I think if you look at what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years, like the whole model of leadership has completely changed, and Obama sort of, because obviously we're in an election year in America, but, he got onto this very early with the whole thing about we, not I. And I think Kate and I believe that our role is to facilitate and help the young leaders get more done rather than to explain what they should be doing.
And that shows very beautifully, especially with the accomplishments that you just mentioned for this year, Kate. the organization has been led with great optimism. But then obviously, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the pandemic, and how for all of us all over the world, we're looking for holding on to something that gives us a bit of normality in the face of uncertainty. So how were you able to lead and remain resilient for your teams, especially since a lot of nonprofits, a lot of small businesses have been affected very dramatically with the pandemic? We'll start with David.
Yeah, look, I think, and it's still going on. I think as we look around the world, there are many countries that are going into the second wave. I think one of the things that, One Young World has always been a very dispersed organization in the sense that, we don't have like 3,000 people in an office somewhere running it. And we've always leveraged technology a lot, and we've always tapped into the fact that we have a very large volunteer organization. So I think the actual physical pivot to, going from people coming into office to not was actually relatively straightforward to navigate through. I think what I look at, and this is something that Ella in particular put together, and Kate can talk more about, but was also then understanding actually, as with many issues today, this isn't something that impacts the world in the same way and in a way that is fair. And it is often, a lot of the poorer countries who don't have the ability to take actions and do things, and don't have like trillions of dollars that they can pump into economies. And that was where the whole initiative and the idea for the COVID fund came about, which Kate, maybe you want to talk a little bit about.
Well, that was, to David's point, Ella's idea there was when I was at the start of the pandemic, quite frankly, hiding myself under a pillow and never, ever coming out again was the way that I felt. And Ella's attitude was, at the end of this pandemic, when someone asks you, Kate, what you did in the pandemic, you better have something that you've done that's valuable, which was fair. And as David said, we did that fundraising in order to help One Young World ambassadors in the most difficult circumstances, in the really, really difficult places around the world. And we moved very, very quickly on that. But the things that for me were critical was that we couldn't, in the face of a global crisis, which One Young World had always on the dark side, One Young World was set up to prepare you and your age group for the things that might come. So the issue there was to keep going and to keep people like you, this precious human capital of leadership, to keep you engaged, on board, moving forward, doing your thing, making the changes that need to be made. And to do that, we had to stay relevant and communicating with all of you all the time. And I was stunned 2 months ago when Safura, who, as you know, runs community for us, told me that at that point, almost 10,000 people had attended One Young World caucuses around the world since October last year. And when I was reading it in a conference, and it said since 2019, and I thought, I'm sure that's supposed to say 2010, but I was already in mid-sentence. It was true. And now 12,000 people since London Summit last year have been at One Young World events. I know that up until 6 weeks ago, the viewership of this stuff like the Together Apart series has had across all platforms at that point about 6 weeks ago, 22 million views. And the engaged minutes were, I think, 3.5 million minutes, which is just a ridiculous number. So that is the example of what we had to do during the pandemic, was turn our hand to doing what we knew we were able to do. The Academy was a product of all of the summits, of people saying, but I want to hear more from Paul Polman or this one or that one. And I couldn't at the summit. Oh my God, here's our chance. We can use these people in the Academy. And we now have, I won't name them here out of respect, but we have 4 of the top 20 universities in the world wanting to partner on that academy. So I think for us, it was a question of keep the goal clearly in mind and just run harder than we have ever run. I mean, I know most of the team are on their knees. We've never worked as hard in 10 years. We really, really haven't. But look at the stuff. The output has been there. So it was a question for us. We took a decision not to lay off any staff, not to furlough anybody, and to keep going. And I think, humbly, I do think there were lessons in that. Putting our faith in our own human capital and saying, we're going to stay with this.
I think the other big lesson, for all of us, be it in the charitable world or the business world, is just keep a focus on what your mission is all about.
Yes.
So
yes.
Our mission isn't to run a conference for young leaders. Our mission is to empower young leaders. So if you can't have a conference because people aren't allowed to travel and there's a major pandemic, then how do you still empower those leaders? How do you still give them a platform? And so that, I think, we looked at, well, what are the things we can continue to do, or even that we can do now that we wouldn't have thought of doing because we'd have been so focused on, putting the summits on, and things like, Together Apart, things like the Academy, things like the COVID Fund were all things that actually we could do because we didn't have the entire focus on a conference and on an event.
Brilliant. So we're kind of running out of time. So I have two final questions for you. The first one, I think for a lot of our viewers are very eager to kind of learn more about. What tips do you have for young entrepreneurs who want to lead in the face of stressful and challenging times? We'll start off with
David.
Kate. Okay.
Go to David. David's the real entrepreneur here.
Look, I think, and it's funny, I did a talk last week to a bunch of young entrepreneurs, and what I did in preparation for it was just ask some phenomenal entrepreneurs, and some of them who've been One Young World counselors like Biz Stone at Twitter, or John Hankey at Niantic, and I got some phenomenal lessons. I'm happy if anyone wants that presentation, happy to share it. But I think, we've covered some of this before, but one of those entrepreneurs replied to me, said, look, just make sure that whatever you're setting up and you're doing, that it needs to exist in the world. Because you're going to spend so much time on this that whether it fails or whether it succeeds, you want to look back and think that was a very good use of my time. And I thought that was a great piece of advice. Does the thing that you want to do, does it need to exist? Are you better actually joining someone else's thing and making that more successful? Yes. And then I think once you've decided that, it's just that resilience point. It's, every single entrepreneur is going to hit major roadblocks, and actually a very topical one, because Slack just sold to Salesforce for $27.7 billion. The thing that most people don't know about Slack is that actually wasn't the product. They were building an online video game, and they just built Slack as a tool to help them, do a better job building their online video game. The online video game closed down. They thought, oh, maybe Slack's a product. And, $27.7 billion later, an amazing success. And I think it just shows about, that whole point about resilience, determination, keep going. If that thing doesn't work, try that thing, and never lose sight of that end goal.
It's such a good point, this point that it's needed in the world. Because if the world needs what you're setting up, you look at something like One Young World, and David has said this many times throughout this year. Now we know how badly the world needs these brilliant young leaders. Now we really know One Young World's work has never been as important as it is now in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, you have people through this election who have spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to ensure that a certain leader didn't win again. It's like, well, maybe just put a couple of $1 million into ensuring that, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, that the choice of leadership in the world's largest and most powerful country isn't to 70-something white men.
Brilliant. Now, to close off, we'll do a rapid fire round kind of thing. Can you recommend any books or podcasts that have had an impact on you this year? Kate.
Yes, Christina Figueres's Outrage and Optimism podcast is excellent for keeping your spirits up. Books, I'm afraid I'm still stuck on a couple of books that I read now. It's getting to be nearly 2 years ago. Tara Westover's Educated and Bill Browder's Red Notice remain for me. They are standouts.
David?
Yeah, so I mean, the other subject we haven't really talked about in this conversation is Black Lives Matter and everything around there. And I think there's a phenomenal book that I would recommend highly called Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. So I'd recommend that. On a lighter note, I'm a huge surf fan. And Garrett McNamara, who is the guy who surfed the biggest ever wave in history, wrote a book called Hound of the Sea, but it's actually really interesting just looking at his journey and when he, in his early 30s, decides what he wants the future of his life to be, when he actually wasn't going that well back then. And then what I would call the hardy perennial, Blake Mycoskie, the founder of TOMS, has obviously been a One Young World counselor, and he wrote a book called Start Something That Matters, and it's a brilliant read, and I think it's so relevant to everybody, whether you're in business, whether you're starting a charity.
Yeah, and on the Black Lives Matter, I would just say, sit down with all of James Baldwin's books and read them and think about them. They are evergreen. I read them when I was your age, and I've been rereading them again. And we have a whole library now at the office of some brilliant literature around all of these subjects. But James Baldwin, he still bring you to your knees.
So I've taken a mental note of all of those. Hopefully I remember them. But thank you so much, Kate and David. This brings us to the end of the session, and you all deserve a big round of applause for your work, your time, and insights today. Thank you to all our viewers as well for joining us today and for your participation. We hope this session has provided you with the actionable and inspirational advice that you can all use during this time. Take care and ma'as-salama.
And thanks to you, Ramatha, a brilliant example of an amazing young leader.
Thank you.